principles of co-production. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. Borada. Thanks for joining us, those of you who've been filtering in. I wanted to share a few thoughts about co-production. For some of you, it might be completely new. For some of you, it may be very well known already. And for some of you, you might know what I'm about to talk about, but maybe under another name. So if you work in a person-centered way or strength-based or outcomes-focused. And so I thought, because we're going to spend 3 days together talking about co-production and all the different aspects of it, it might be useful to have a common language and common understanding just to start us off and to carry us through the rest of the conference. So this is what I have just 3 slides, and this is what I wanted to talk about this morning. So I'm going to put a slide on screen. You should be able to see this first slide. Can I get some nods or thumbs up? Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. The first point I wanted to make is, in terms of what are we talking about when we talk about co-production, is there has to be an interaction, a relationship, a shared decision-making and power between citizens and professionals. And I use those 2 terms as shorthand, but basically people who deliver or provide services and people who access or use services. And those roles are quite fluid. In our professional life with a work hat on, we might be service providers, and in our personal life, we might be service users, and sometimes both, so depending on what we're doing. But the main thing is, it's not co-production if we don't have both the service user and the professional in the conversation. If we've got just citizen service users self-organizing, doing things for themselves, it's community-based activism, it's community organizing, it's great, it's valuable, it's brilliant, but it's not co-production if there isn't an interaction with the services and organizations that support people to live their best lives. And likewise, if we've got organizations talking to organizations, it's not co-production, it's collaboration. And collaboration is really important, and actually good collaboration enables good co-production to happen. But if the service user, if the voice of the person who's accessing services isn't part of the conversation, then it doesn't count as co-production. So that was the first point I wanted to make. There's an expression in community organizing that says, if you're not at the table, then you're probably on the menu. So that's what we're trying to avoid. If we're going to be making decisions about people's lives, then the people should be part of that decision-making process. They should be around the table for it to be co-production. Now, I'll have a caveat, which I'll come to in a minute, which is I'm not saying we should be doing co-production for everything with everyone all of the time. But we'll talk about this in a second. But if we're going to do co-production and do co-production well, then we must make sure that we have the voice of the professional as well as the voice of the citizen together. Co-production isn't a process. I wish I could give you, a 12-point tick list, 12 steps. And if you do those 12 steps, then you'll have nailed co-production. In a way, it would be easier to explain, but also it would completely lose what makes co-production co-production. Co-production is about a values base, it's about how we show up in our work. And from there, there are processes, there are actions, but really it's the values that matter, that underpin what we do, the mindset, the culture. So the 5 values of co-production are working in a person-centered way. So making sure that we value everybody who's involved in the process, that we recognize that everybody's got strengths to bring and knowledge and wisdom and experience to offer. These are valuable to the process. The second one is to work across silos. Organizations are very good at putting things in their own categories, and they don't necessarily work together. And so there's a department who does this and a department who does that, and a third department will do something else. And there might be an organization down the road that's doing something similar, but a bit different, and we don't really talk to each other. So working across silos and joining those dots really helps us to support better the same people that we're all looking to support. But also the biggest silo of all is the one traditionally between professionals and citizens. And actually, we need to blur those boundaries and go, we're all in the same team. We're all on the same side. We're all trying to solve these challenges together. So we're on the same team. It's no longer you have specific professional experience, you have specific lived experience, and we'll deal with them separately. Is actually how do we get around the table and join these dots so that we learn from each other and build better solutions together. The third value of co-production is focusing on what matters, is being outcomes focused. So rather than checking, are you eligible for the things that our system can provide, we're asking, what does a good life look like for you, and how can we help you to meet that? So turning the telescope round from do you fit into our pigeonholes to what does a good life look like for you, and how do we support that? How do we plug any gaps there might be? The fourth value of co-production is, to me, the one that underpins absolutely everything else, because without it, you won't be able to do the rest, which is building strong relationships that have trust, that have reciprocity, that's give and take, and that enable people to work together in a, with trust and with mutual respect. So that fourth value enables everything else to happen. In order for that fifth value to come into play, that organizations shift from delivering a service to actually enabling change. We create a space, we facilitate a space where people can be the change that they want to see. Everybody's got a part to play in that change. So those are the values that underpin this work. And you might see them popping up in your work, in your activities. It might be called co-production. It might not be called co-production, officially. You might not have the label, but it doesn't matter. As long as the values are there, that's what matters. So how do you see them showing up in your work, in your activities, in your interactions with services? Earlier, I said, I had in my little caveat that I'm not advocating that we should do co-production with everybody for everything all the time. And this is what I mean. Co-production. Oh, and one thing I forgot to say as well, in Wales, we also talk about involvement. And in Wales, in our policy context, co-production equals involvement. Involvement equals co-production. In research, in England, in other places, involvement might have slightly different definitions. So it's important that we're clear what is it we're talking about. But in our Wales context, because of the acts that we have, we talk about co-production and involvement in the same breath. And they live very much on the doing with end of the spectrum. You might be familiar with the Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, a nice model of all the different kinds of interactions between citizen and state. And I like the model, but I've put it on its side because I don't want to imply that we should always be aiming for the top. There is a time and there is a place to do 2 people and to do 4 people. If I've got somebody's had a heart attack and they fainted and the paramedics are on the scene, the patient's not in a position to co-design the journey of care. So sometimes we have to do what we've trained to do. Sometimes we have to support people until they have the capability and the capacity to do it for themselves. But in the meantime, we have to do some things for them. And that's part of having a welfare state and a state and a public sector service that looks after people, that cares for people. But if we do 2 and if we do 4 by default, then we might be robbing people of the opportunity to have voice and choice and control when they're able to make joint decisions. And so the encouragement to organizations is, how can we move closer to the doing with end of the spectrum? We'll do 2 and 4 when needed, but keep asking, can we be doing with more? Can we be doing with more? Where is the power? Where is the voice? Where is the choice? Where is the control? Mike will talk more about this afternoon. He's got a whole session around the spectrum and the different doing 2, doing 4, doing with. But my spoiler and my recommendation with this is choose co-production wisely. Do co-production where it adds value, where we're bringing people around the table and designing solutions together, offer solutions that no one team or one person could come up with on their own. And a final thought to leave you with, that and a reference to Edgar Kahn's seminal book, No More Throwaway People, the co-production imperative. Co-production is an imperative these days for lots of reasons. There's, like Dan said in the opening, there's an ethical reason to do co-production. It is the right thing to do. Sharing power, enabling people to be part of decisions that shape their lives is the common sense human thing to do. There's also an economic argument for co-production, and how if we do good co-production, we'll make better decisions that'll move us into prevention and avoid people coming into crisis and catch people upstream, all sorts of good practice that means that actually, rather than sending the expensive ambulance to scoop somebody up from the bottom of the cliff when they've fallen off, actually we create the barriers, we create the safety net before, so people don't fall off, which makes sense in terms of efficiency of services and being able to do more with the pressured resources that we have access to, with all the different reasons, economic, social, that we have. There's also a shifting expectation from us as consumers, as citizens, that actually we have our say in other types of interactions in our life. And we can use digital, we can send TripAdvisor reviews, we can complain on Twitter and expect a response. We expect to be heard and that somebody takes action on what we have to say. And so there's a growing desire to be part of having our voice and being part of solutions. And like I said a little bit earlier, there is a legal and policy context in Wales, framework, strategies, legislation that are moving us in the direction of co-production and increased citizen and community involvement. So for all these reasons, co-production is important, but most of all, in my book, most of all, because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral, the ethical imperative of how do we work with people? How do we show up as good humans with other humans and make decisions wisely together? It's important to understand co-production, what it can do, what it can't do. Co-production isn't for everything, but it is for what they call wicked problems or complex problems, things where there's no clear-cut solution, there's no silver bullet, where the strength of bringing us together is that together we can come up with better solutions. So we need to keep learning it, we need to keep sharing it. Co-production isn't simple. It's lovely having my one diagram and, you know, my 5 values on the screen. It's like, oh yes, it fits in 3 slides. It's very straightforward. And actually when the rubber meets the road is when, you know, it's a daily practice. It's about humans, everything's about relationships. It changes all the time. So it's a daily practice of co-production, and we've got to keep learning, we've got to keep sharing. And so this space, this conference is the perfect place to be doing that. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll hand back over to Dan and Margaret. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Noreen.